What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest, covering the Oregon Ducks for Sports Illustrated on Fan Nation. We got another preview podcast episode for you guys, and I am very excited about this one. My guest on the podcast today is a former colleague of mine, fellow Gonzaga alumnus, Brenna Green. She is the sports director at Creme 2 in Spokane, covering the Washington State Cougars. You got some Zags basketball as well. Brenna, how you doing? Thank you so much for being here.
I'm good. Just coming off covering Gonzaga's first game last night. Chet Holmgren, pretty good debut. So yeah, everything is hunky dory. Surviving November when we have college basketball and college football collide. So there you go.
I hear you on that one. Yeah, I covered the Ducks doubleheader yesterday, so that was a crazy one just seeing that overlap. But yeah, let's talk some Cougs. I mean, I feel like this team has taken a lot of people by surprise this year. You know, we have some offense and defensive focuses that we kind of want to get into here. But I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about the whole Rolovich situation. It's obviously been a roller coaster for that team, for that athletic department with everything going on. Just kind of take us inside, you know, the program and kind of what the mood's like, you know, with all of that crazy coaching turnover to get to this point.
Honestly, I think that program is tighter than it has ever been during my time here because of everything they have gone through. I think it was absolutely the right call to have somebody on staff be the head coach instead of bringing someone from the outside in. So I think that has been really helpful to have somebody who is already has relationships with players and players know that they can trust him. Um, yeah, it was a crazy 2 months. It's still kind of going on as we're waiting for this lawsuit to drop. It'll probably be a few more weeks until it does. And yeah, even though Rolovich is gone, we're still gonna have to do some coverage of Rolovich as this kind of all unfolds.
Certainly no easy task, you know, when you lose your head coach in the middle of a season, and especially all those staffers that exited right along with him. You know, just tell us a little bit about Jake Dicker and, you know, kind of what he's done to get the Cougars to this point, playing some really good football.
I think he's done a really good job of just being positive, not making any excuses and just being positive. I know that the first practice that they had after Rolovich was let go, he put up a picture on the Jumbotron at Martin Stadium, and it was of the guys celebrating on the field. And he said, just remember, nobody can take away your joy. And just because of what has happened, that does not mean that we can't create more moments like this. And I thought that that was a really profound, incredible message that he sent to those players. And it's obviously resonated. You know, the BYU game, you know, if they don't fumble a extra point, Cougs might have won that game. And then obviously they come out against Arizona State and just demolish. So they've been competitive, and it really doesn't feel like they've missed a step. You know, you mentioned the offensive coordinator or the other staff members who left, which were mostly offensive guys. One of them was their co-offensive coordinator, Craig Stutzman. And Dickert has said that he thinks it's been easier for the guys just having kind of one voice on offense and Brian Smith, because there wasn't, you know, he never said this, but you know, you have Rolovich, who's obviously an offensive coach. You have Stutzman, who's the co-offensive coordinator, and you have Brian Smith, who's the co-offensive coordinator. And that's a lot of voices for players to be hearing from. So I think that just having one guy be in charge of the offense has also been helpful for this team.
You can understand why it would be complicated to have so many different voices coming at you, even in a normal situation, much less with a major coaching change coming down in Pullman. So that'll be something to figure out. But I also think hearing that from you kind of helps, you know, kind of contextualize this Washington State defense a little bit that we're going to talk about. You talk about that Arizona State game. I think one of the things that really stood out to me was just how they, made Jaden Daniels uncomfortable and slowed down what had been a really, really strong rushing attack from what I've seen earlier in the year. But before we get into, both sides of the ball, I think one thing that would be really interesting to talk about is with this matchup, for those that don't know, Cougs come to Autzen Stadium for a 7:30 kickoff. Nice and late. Oregon's been getting some really bizarre kickoffs this year. Brent, I know you've had to deal with that yourself, and in your time covering the Cougs, but Pac-12 after dark, it's something that kind of gets thrown out there every time we have a night matchup with the East Coasters going to sleep. People talk about, oh, they miss the craziness out here, the good games, but Pac-12 after dark, the first thing I think of is chaos. And with that, I think that Washington State is the team in the Pac-12 that really embodies that. What are your thoughts on Pac-12 after dark, and then maybe how it could carry over into this matchup with the Ducks?
First of all, this is our first night game since the first game of the season, which we love. Thank you. It just so happens to be that they put this night game on the same day at the same time that Gonzaga plays number 5 Texas. So I don't have anything going on Saturday or anything. When I just think of when I think of Pac-12 after dark, one of the first games that comes to mind for me actually is WSU's game in 2019 at Oregon. All week, I can't stop thinking about when Anthony Gordon, WSU's former quarterback, puked on the sidelines during that game. He got so worked up that he just puked.
I never knew that.
He straight up puked on the sidelines. And I just remember that sideline report and just dying. But that game was a crazy game. It was won by the kicker, Oregon's kicker, and that was a wild one. And I would very much not be surprised if this was a wild one too. WSU has always been a thorn in Oregon's side. Last year, they only were a thorn for a half. But generally, it's been difficult. I mean, 2019, I think, was Oregon's first win in that series in like 5 years. So WSU's kind of had their number. Now, of course, we have completely different coaching staffs now, really with both teams from when they had that 5-game losing streak. But Oregon and Wazoo have had some good matchups, and then you add in the dark, and I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be crazy. That's just what it's gonna be. So, we take it as it comes.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really excited for this game. You talk about flashing back to that 2019 matchup, Camden Lewis being the hero there with the game-winning field goal. He's had a tremendous season. I believe he's 9 for 9 now for the Ducks, kicking, and had a big field goal and what was a pretty crazy game against the Huskies in Seattle. You talk about the rain, the wind, the cold. It was just all working against him, and he was he was on point when the Ducks needed him. So let's dive into this matchup, Brenna. We kind of want to take a look at Wazoo and what they're bringing to the table offensively. A good place to start is always with the quarterback, Jaden DeLora. I was talking about him yesterday and in one of my previous videos, just this streak of 4 straight Pac-12 wins. You talk about that close loss to BYU. They could very well be on a 5-game winning streak if not for that fumbled extra point that you mentioned earlier. What do you think that the Ducks are really preparing for here with Jaden DeLora? Young guy, dual threat, can move around in the pocket a lot, but he's an exciting player that can make some big plays.
Young player who's not afraid of anything, sometimes to his own peril. That's Jaden DeLora. He's not afraid of any moment. He is ready to go. Sometimes, though, that leads to mistakes being made and interceptions. So he's pretty good against Arizona State. But BYU, there were a lot of near interceptions that didn't happen either. He had some moments, but he's not afraid to take the strike. He is not afraid of the moment, and that's just how Jaden is. I mean, I think just I'm kind of like, going through all the quarterbacks in the conference right now. I really think it's him and Anthony Brown. I know that Ducks fans have not been happy with Anthony Brown at times. I'm well aware, because I follow a lot of Oregon Twitter because I'm from there. Um, but I really think it's kind of him and Anthony Brown that have put themselves as the top two quarterbacks in the Pac-12 right now, just kind of going through everything. USC's had their issues with injuries and stuff like that. I'm racking my brain currently, but yeah, I think those two are the two best right now in the conference.
Yeah, we definitely have to talk a little bit more about Brown and kind of his progression later on in this episode. But with Delora, I think you talk about that fearlessness. It makes him fun to watch, but he can get himself into some trouble at the same time. Another cool note for people who don't know, he's from St. Louis High School, where Marcus Mariota was found by Chip Kelly and his staff. Those I was going to say all those years ago, but it really wasn't that long ago, I guess. But yeah, Delora's a cool player to watch. You talk about his most recent performance against Arizona State and that big win down in Tempe, 17 for 27 with 234 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. I think another thing that is worth mentioning here is, for people who don't follow the Cougs too closely, he did miss a couple games early on in the season, but it looks like he's really found his stride here. As like you said, Brenna, the Cougs are in contention for a Pac-12 North title if they can take care of business against the Ducks.
Yeah, I do want to say one thing. Completely, Jayden de Laura and Marcus Mariota, completely different personalities, so don't expect them to be the same. Jayden is much more fiery, and Jayden is much more animated than Marcus is. That's just how he plays the game. That's who he is, as I've kind of hinted at before. So, and he's constantly changing his hair color. That sort of stuff. So that's just Jayden. He's very much his own individual, but he's definitely starting to really find his groove in the Pac-12, and that's been fun to watch.
You flip to the other side of the ball for the Ducks, and man, Jayden de Laura is going to have some pretty stiff competition. A lot of really talented guys that are going to be coming after him, trying to give him a long day. Passing the ball. Obviously, you look at Kayvon Thibodeau, who is just, he hasn't had an amazing game every game this year, but for the times that we've seen him, he's just been incredible. You look at his one half of football against Cal. I don't know if the Ducks win that game without him, just with how close that game got down the stretch, and that the fact that they needed that pressure on Chase Garbers. And then against UCLA, that was a wild game, and I mean, they were abusing Dorian Thompson-Robinson. They were just hit after hit after hit on him, and credit to him for staying in there as long as he could. But then you got Noah Sewell. He's just, Tim DeRuyter, the defensive coordinator, was talking about him earlier this week. He said Noah's Noah when he was talking about his game against Washington. That dude's all over the place. He shows up every game, and he was really the face of that defense when Thibodeau was missing some time this year. So, as far as what Washington State's going to have to contend with, looking at some of their stats for the offensive line, we don't get a lot of stats for the offensive line, but 20 sacks on the season is what I'm seeing here allowed by the Wazoo offensive line. So about 2 sacks per game. What do you think that you can share with us about the offensive line, Brennan, kind of how they're coming along?
They've really gelled over the last few games. I think they've done a really good job. I mean, and you have strong leadership on the offensive line. Abraham Lucas is going to get drafted into the NFL this year. He is undoubtedly their leader. And he's a very, very smart, conscientious guy. And then you have Liam Ryan, who is also a firecracker and has been around this program for a while. And between the two of them, those two guys, they're not going to let their position group let down. And they had some issues at the start of the season, especially in terms of helping to run. There were some problems with that. And there was some, Borghi wasn't really hitting his stride, and obviously that's partly him too, but it was a little bit concerning. And now it seems like those issues are a little bit more handled. They've done a good job of protecting Jayden and over the last few games. And it's a solid group of guys. There's some newcomers on there, but generally you've got a good mixture of guys with experience who are, extremely talented, and in Abe and Liam, and then some fresher faces as well that have stepped up to the challenge.
Abe Lucas is a big name that I definitely am going to be keeping an eye on with him going toe to toe against this Oregon D line. You look at guys like Brandon Dorless, who's been a huge success story for the Ducks this year. I was really excited. I kind of felt like I was semi ahead of the curve last year, just when I was just kind of I was banging that Brandon Dorless drum. I felt like every week just saying this guy keeps taking strides. He had that huge hit on Chase Griffin last year against UCLA that resulted in a Jordan Happel pick. So everyone kind of knows about that. And he's a guy that maybe doesn't show up in the stat sheet too much, but he's been real solid. He was right in there last week on that fourth down stop when Sean McGrew tried to get a first down on that Wildcat run. Him and Jeffrey Bossa tag team to get that huge stop, which was really, really pivotal if you think about how the rest of that game played out, Brenna, with the Ducks going down that next drive, scoring, taking the lead, and they never looked back. But with this Washington State offense, just to bring some more numbers to the table here, averaging 259.8 yards a game through the air in the passing attack, but not super strong, at least statistically, running the ball, 115.1 yards a game on the ground. But they do have some really talented backs in Max Borghi and Deion McIntosh.
Yeah. I also just wanted to add one thing about the offensive line, because I wanted to make sure I was right here. No sacks against ASU, 1 sack against BYU. So
they're on a hot streak.
They're doing well right now. Now, of course, Ducks have great players, and we all know that. Running backs, that's where we were going next, correct?
Yes.
You've got the two-headed monster of Borghi and McIntosh. McIntosh, they both missed some time this year due to injuries. Actually, I think Max came back when he was not 100% in that Utah game. He was not 100%, but he did play in that game. McIntosh missed a few games, but he came back last week, so he's good to go. I think he missed like a game and a half, actually. He's good to go. And then, so you have those two guys, and they've both had, great games this year, great individual games. Max said at the beginning of the year, I'm scoring every game. He hasn't scored every game, but it's been damn near every game. He's been a man on a mission. And Deion's been great too. Every once in a while you'll get Nakia Watson in there, but he's normally, if both backs are healthy, then he's like the fourth quarter in a blowout option back. But the staff really, really likes Nakia too. They've got a really solid running backs room, and that's not necessarily normal around Wazoo. So it's been fun to watch the two of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of just kind of thoughts on the running backs, and this matchup kind of just popped up into my head. But to go to your point, you talk about the two-headed monster, Borghi and McIntosh approaching 1,000 yards together. As a group on the ground this year, 10 touchdowns. So it's going to be cool to see kind of how they're rotated in here. But with just because we were talking about running backs in Washington State, you got Jim Mastro coaching the backs at Oregon. He came from Wazoo. You have Ken Wilson coaching the linebackers. He came from Wazoo at his last stop. Joe Salavea. It's just like a coaching tree between these two schools that I think is just, it just feeds into, it's a storyline off the field. I guess you could say, the narrative whole thing, it's not really part of the game, but it kind of is. It's just been crazy to see how Cristobal has built out his staff with so many quality coaches coming from the Palouse.
Yeah, well, money talks, and WSU doesn't have the money that Oregon does at the end of the day. Let's just be completely frank here. So that's one of the reasons why that all happened. I think Borghi might not. I think Borghi was not coached by Mastro, if I'm correct. I'm just thinking here. Yeah, Mastro recruited Borghi, but he never actually coached him. So there's still some connection going on there, but it's starting to graduate out per se. So yeah, there's still that connection with Max since Mastro recruited him, but he never coached him. So
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that one.
yeah.
Just to kind of wrap up the offensive side of the ball, I want to talk about the wide receivers that the Cougs got. I know two of their bigger names are Calvin Jackson Jr. and Travell Harris. You look at the secondary for Oregon; they're dealing with a little bit of the injury bug right now. Obviously, Bennett Williams got hurt earlier this year, and he was just having a monster start to the season. He's out for the year. Steve Stevens the fourth, though, it doesn't look like he's going to be playing in this one, just based on the latest that we're hearing from Cristobal. He suffered what was called a soft tissue injury against Colorado, was reevaluated last week before the Washington game, ultimately didn't go, and now it's looking like it's a little bit more significant than they originally thought. So no return timetable for him at this time, but we talked about Jordan Happel. He got that big interception against Washington. Mikael Wright's been playing really well. DJ James has really played a lot of good football this year with that big interception that sealed the game against UCLA. And then Verone McKinley, the general, I mean, he's doing really well. He's had a little bit of problems making some tackles of late that I know he'd want to have back, but overall, I'd say it's really solid. But we'll see how Happel steps into this role. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to ask you, Brenna, about Calvin Jackson and Travell Harris to bring it back to the Cougs here. What can you tell me about them?
If there's a two-headed monster and wide receiver, it's the two of them. Deshaun Stribling's been a nice third option for them, and there's definitely a connection between him and Jaden, since they're both Hawaii kids. You can definitely see that play out on the field, but it's been the Travell and Calvin show out there, which has been super fun to watch. They're both just incredible characters, and they're a lot of fun. But yeah, if we're talking about, if we're going through this this offense, it's those two, and then there's a drop off. I'm kind of looking right now. I mean, Jackson has 667 yards, 5 touchdowns. Travell has 574 yards and 6 touchdowns. And then you go to Deshaun, and he has 332 yards and 3 touchdowns. So an obvious drop off after those two. So yeah, they've been electric. They've been a lot of fun to watch. They're undersized guys. They're not super big and stocky like or lanky even is the normal wide receiver we see today. But that WSU has been able to succeed with those guys that may not look like your prototypical Pac-12 receiver at this point, and they've done a great job so far this season.
Gonna have to keep an eye on those guys as the Ducks look to slow down the potent passing attack from Washington State. As we kind of shift over to the other side of the ball here, just wanted to mention Jeffrey Bossa before on defense. He made the switch from safety to linebacker for this year. Everyone's kind of heard about that, but man, what a success story he's been. And just he's gelling with that backer group and looking more confident with every passing week. So, Brennan, let's switch to the defense here. I think that, we talked about the continuity that they were able to see on that side of the ball with regard to the staff and the coaching turnover. But I know that they've been led by one guy in particular that really stands out, edge rusher Ron Stone, who is from San Jose. So shout out to the 408 there. Just wanted to start it there. What can you tell me about this defense that the Cougs are bringing to town on Saturday?
They've been really, really solid this year. They did have some issues against BYU in terms of rushing. That was not a pretty game for them in terms of rushing. And Dickert said afterwards, he said, we haven't been great in terms of taking away the rush this year. We've just gotten the big plays when we needed them. So that was a real point of emphasis going into that Arizona State game. And my goodness, they did a great job. That Arizona State game was not pretty for the Sun Devils in terms of rushing. It was very minor. I'm looking up the stat. Obviously, it's been a few weeks since that game, but I'm just looking up the stats right now for their rushing. I mean, it was, 131 yards. That's fine. It's not great overall, especially when you have Jaden McDaniels. That's pretty good. So yeah, they've it seems like they've shored up the rushing problem. We'll see if they have or not. They've just been really solid. You have a lot of guys on defense who have been there for a while. It's a defense where you look at it, and for me, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with almost everyone on this defense. Like, there's no, you have Jahad Woods is their undisputed leader. He is he's been an incredible part of this program for years and years, and he's definitely the guy leading. Justice Rogers has been good. Ron Stone, as you mentioned, he's a great vocal leader for them. Brennan Jackson is also kind of a la the same mold as Stone in terms of how vocal he is and kind of the fun. They both bring the fun. I don't know how else to describe it. They're really, really fun guys. You have a cornerbacks group that is also pretty veteran. In fact, they had to move a guy from corner to safety, George Hicks, because they had too many corners. But you've got Derek Langford on one end, and you have Jalen Watson on the other. They've been fairly decent. And then Shao Smith Wade, who's a sophomore, has been coming in and kind of helping spell them at times. So yeah, Armani Marsh is another guy that the coaching staff just loves. I mean, he's played multiple positions this year just to help with injuries and things like that. He's kind of been their utility guy. So it's a group that is really experienced, and there's nobody on there that like anybody like it's not a group that Jahad Woods is probably their most well-known player, and he's not someone who's super well-known in the Pac-12, just to be completely frank with you. He should be more well-known, but he's not. And it's a solid group of guys that people might not have name recognition on, but they all have really helped contribute in their own ways. And it's a group of guys that there isn't a lot of newness going on there. They've been in the fire. They've done it.
Cougs defensive front having a strong game against ASU, like you mentioned, Brenna, and they're going to need to come with their A game again against this Oregon offense. Particularly on the ground, that's really where they root their identity. And I think when you flip it to Oregon and the offensive line, that's been one of the great successes of this year. I wouldn't say that they were playing poorly at the beginning of the year, but I think a lot of fans were kind of questioning why we were seeing so much rotation. And not very much consistency from a personnel standpoint. And then you have Alex Forsythe miss the entire month of October with battles with back spasms. Ryan Walk moves over to handle the center duties, and they don't miss a beat. But then Jackson Powers Johnson gets hurt against UCLA. He was one of their main contributors, breaking through as a true freshman. And then now heading into this Wazoo game, it looks like Walk's going to miss a couple weeks, but Forsythe's back. And then fortunately for Oregon, they have Powers Johnson coming back from his ankle injury. Mario Cristobal saying he was ready to roll earlier this week. So, some good and bad on the injury front for the Ducks heading into this game. But I think that we're seeing firsthand that the value of all those rotations that Alex Mirabal and Mario Cristobal implemented here really, really, paying dividends. And I think that, Wazoo's hot right now, obviously, like you said, having that strong performance as a defensive front against ASU. But also, you mentioned the bye. I feel like we haven't really talked about that. I think that's a dynamic that's worth mentioning here. Oregon just had a pretty big emotional, physical game against Washington, last week. all the Washington schools in 2 weeks. I'm getting tripped up.
Yeah.
But say what you will about being spent emotionally, and then you had the stuff post game with players jawing back and forth, and then Wazoo comes to town fresh off a bye and a pretty commanding win.
Yeah, it's a late bye week too for the season. I if I'm Wazoo, I'm like, thank God we got here in one piece. Like, it was, I was, as all that relevant stuff was going on, I was like, man, I bet they'd kill for a bye week right now. So, and they had to go play 2 more games after that. So definitely much needed for this team. and helpful for them that they're able to get an extra week to prepare for, let's face it, the toughest team in conference.
Yeah, and I think one of the big people we got to watch in this matchup is Anthony Brown, right? Leading the way for the Oregon offense. Didn't have the most impressive day statistically against Washington, but I mean, to be totally frank, they didn't really need him with the way that they were running the ball. Over anytime you rack up over 300 yards on the ground, I think everybody in the stadium last week knew that Oregon was going to run the ball, but Washington just couldn't do anything to slow them down really. So with Anthony Brown, he had that pretty bad interception early in the game, but he was able to kind of settle back in. Had a touchdown on the ground, and then that big touchdown through the air to Devin Williams. So, you talked about fans being, a little upset. Maybe not even little. I'd say noticeably upset, very upset with Brown earlier in the year. But hey, Ducks got a number 3 ranking in the college football playoffs, and they're still in control of their own destiny as far as if you take care of business and win the rest of the way here, then you should find yourself in the playoff rather. But this game against Washington State is not one to be taken lightly. And then you have the road trip to Utah and Oregon State with that rivalry, and they're looking better than they have most years. So there's a lot of stuff at play here. But I'm curious to see how these veteran defensive backs that you mentioned, Brenna, are going to match up with Oregon's wide receivers, because I think that's a very deep group, even though we haven't seen a ton of production statistically. But you look at a guy like Devin Williams, who really looks like he's stepping into his full potential as a wide receiver after coming over from USC. And, he's a big, physical, imposing guy, but he can move pretty well too. So do you think how do you think that the Wazoo secondary kind of matches up with what you've seen from Oregon as far as the skill positions go?
I think that the secondary can be very hot and cold. If you get them on an on night, it's on. If you get them on an off night, it's not as great. I guess it would be great if you're an Oregon fan. Like I said, there's a lot of experience there, so that is helpful. But it's really just dependent upon the night. So hopefully they're done with that hot and cold streak, because they've done pretty well the last 2 games. But yeah, I think it's you look at Jalen Watson as somebody who constantly feels like he has something to prove. I mean, both these guys came from JUCO. They were not, blue star or not blue chip 5-star recruits. So both these guys, when they step out on the field, feel like they have something to prove. And so I think that they're going to take this matchup with Oregon's, big blue chip 5-star wide receivers pretty seriously. But obviously you have to think about the fact that they're blue chip and 5-star wide receivers for a reason. So it's really going to depend on I'd say the first. We'll know how this is going to go for the secondary, and I'd say the first quarter. That's by the end of the first quarter, we'll know if it's going to be a night where Wazoo is going to be on, or if it's going to be a night where Wazoo is completely off.
And that'll be directly tied, Brandon, to how much success I think Oregon has running the ball. I mean, Joe Moorhead has said that the success of the offense is predicated on running the ball, but if the run game's working, then why switch it up? I mean, I just, as someone who's followed this team and watched a lot of football, I want to see them just continue to open up the pass game, because if they have these postseason aspirations, then they're really going to have to be able to move the ball, both ways, through the air and on the ground. So we talked about Devin Williams already, but Micah Pittman's a guy that keeps emerging. He's done a really good job in the return game as well. And then Johnny Johnson's been super physical as a blocker on the perimeter, helping spring some big run plays. Jalen Redd had some good catches against Washington. So, even though it wasn't the most impressive day passing the ball, I feel like they still got what they needed out of it, and then ultimately managed that game, in a way that made sense. We're kind of winding down here, Brenna. I think we got a really good feel for both sides of the ball with regard to Oregon and Washington State. Any other notes that you kind of wanted to contribute here as we kind of get fans ready for this matchup?
Trying to think if there's anything special teams wise or anything else that I did not cover. I mean, I just know that there's a wide receiver on this team named Renard Bell who is not playing this year because he tore his ACL before fall camp, and so he's kind of he's chilling. And Renard this week tweeted a GIF on Monday of a kid in water, like springing up with a duck in his mouth. So this team might not want to say that this isn't, it's just a new opponent every week, and that's the team we're focused on this week. Blah blah blah. Obviously, there are some people around there that take great pride in beating the Ducks. So, I think that the senior class knows their history against Oregon, and some of it's good and some of it's bad. And I think a lot of those seniors want to go out with a win. So, when you're Oregon and you have all the money in the world and these crazy recruits, I think Wazoo really revels in playing them, just because of the fact that they are close-ish, and yet their realities are so different. So I'm excited. I'm excited to watch this matchup as much as I can, because I'm also going to be at the Gonzaga game at the same time. So we'll see how much I actually get to watch this game. Probably not going to be a lot, but I'm excited to follow along on Twitter and everything like that. And hopefully it ends up being a competitive game and fun for everybody involved. Right now I'd still give the edge to Oregon. I think I just have to. They're at home. They're the number 3 team in the country. I mean, I would be dumb to not give them the edge right now. But I do think that Wazoo isn't gonna back down.
This is a game that if I'm Oregon, I'm kind of looking at my schedule and saying, thank God I get this game at home. I mean, it's no secret that the Ducks have been better at home this year, and just really in most years. I mean, that kind of just goes without saying, right? You think that you play better football at home, but they have had some big road tests on the schedule this year. You look at UCLA and Ohio State, but a lot on the line, Brenna. Shot at the Pac-12 North title for the Ducks if they take care of business, and then if I believe it was Oregon State loses to Stanford is the other thing that they need to happen. Yeah, Oregon State lost to Stanford to make that all happen. I just think it's been great talking to you, Brenna. Kind of just we think about all the chaos that goes into a matchup like this between Wazoo specifically and Oregon, and I think you've really helped bring that to light. I always like to give guests a chance to plug their work. Obviously a lot of people are interested in seeing what Wazoo brings to the table. So I know you cover them. Where can people find more of your work?
My Twitter is at Brenna Green _, as well as my Instagram. So those are my 2 social media channels per se. I also have a Facebook page that's Brenna Green Sports. But let's be frank, the majority of my stuff is on Twitter. So I'm relatively active. So there you go.
There you go. Yeah, make sure to go check Brenna out on Twitter and give her a follow. She does a lot of awesome sports content. I mean, I know that firsthand from working with her, but since I was at Krem, she's only kept killing it, doing her thing. If you want to find more of me, you can also find this podcast on my YouTube channel, Oregon Football Max Torres. And then you can follow me on Twitter at mtorresports. And then make sure you check out ducksdigest.com. We got tons of Oregon content going up every day. Football, basketball, whatever it is, recruiting. We got it all there. So go ahead and check us out. That's all we have for this preview episode. Ducks prepare for Washington State. Saturday night, 7:30 kick at Autzen Stadium. That's all for this one. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.